Hey guys, tonight we slip behind the thick velvet curtains of a stone chamber in the chilly spring of 1311, somewhere deep within the labyrinthine halls of a northern French castle. The fire in the hearth is nothing but a sullen orange glow, and even the tapestries on the wall seem to shiver in the draught that slides beneath the oaken door. Your eyes are blurry with exhaustion. It's well past midnight, but you're not alone in your vigil. Somewhere nearby, a woman lies in labor, biting her knuckles to muffle her pain. Two candlelit figures hover at her side, a stoic, grey-haired midwife, and a young nurse trembling as she dabs the mother's sweating brow. On the other side of the door, armored guards shift restlessly, their faces hidden by shadow and their orders as cold as their steel. No word of this birth leaves the chamber. Outside, the town is silent, but in this chamber, the stakes are enormous. The woman is noble-born. Her father's lands stretch from the coast to the deepest forests, but the child about to be born is doubly cursed. Royal blood, but on the wrong side of the blanket. No one here dares speak the father's name, not even in a whisper. The consequences, if word escaped, would ripple through every noble hall in France, perhaps even draw swords from England to Spain. You're here in the room, the scent of blood and candle wax thick in the air, heart racing as you realize that tonight isn't just about a birth, it's about survival. You might think you'll slip away quietly after this tale, but if you'd actually lived in this era, with your parentage under suspicion and your fate decided before your first breath, let's just say you probably wouldn't survive till dawn. If you're fascinated by the deadly dance of secrets, power, and bloodlines that shaped medieval Europe, smash that like button. Subscribe for more bedtime stories that aren't for the faint of heart, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what hour it is. Bonus points if it's after midnight and you're not descended from a king's scandal. And as always, settle back, breathe deep, and pray no one knocks at your door tonight. You don't get to enjoy the newborn's first cry for long. The child, let's say a boy, though it could be either, is swaddled almost before the umbilical cord is cut. The midwife inspects him for any birthmarks, any hint of royal heritage that might betray the secret if he survives beyond these stone walls. The mother, exhausted, weeps quietly. Not for joy, but with a raw fear that seems to claw at her from the inside. She knows threat is not a vague future possibility. It's immediate, pounding at the door with the boots of the men outside. A bastard of royal blood is a living, breathing claim, a potential pawn, a blackmail note, or a spark for civil war. If the wrong ears hear even a hint of this secret, the lives of everyone present, midwife, nurse, mother, even the guards, are at risk. The walls feel like they're listening. The fire is burning low. You wonder who will survive until morning. It wasn't always like this in every age or place, but for much of medieval Europe, a royal bastard meant trouble with a capital T, in a world obsessed with legitimacy, where power passed not just by strength or charisma, but by the fine print of birth. The difference between a crowned heir and a condemned bastard could be a single scribbled line on a marriage contract. If you're born on the wrong side of that line, well, you'd better pray for anonymity or divine intervention. Frankly, both would be nice. The unlucky child in our story doesn't get a name tonight. Not officially. Names are dangerous things. Names mean lineage, and lineage means claim. The midwife whispers a baptismal prayer anyway, because she's superstitious, or because she pities the infant, or maybe just because she's terrified that an unbaptized baby might come back to haunt her. The medieval imagination was creative like that. The baby's first blanket is rough, woven by peasants, deliberately chosen so no one will later say, "That's not a peasant's child. Look at those fine linens." Every detail from the blanket to the swaddling knot is part of an intricate dance of concealment, but concealment in the medieval world is never guaranteed. News travels fast in castles, faster than a monk can finish his morning prayers. There are too many ears. Kitchen maids, scribes, scullery boys with loose tongues, ambitious noblemen with a thirst for gossip, and let's be honest, midwives who sometimes make mistakes, or who, under the right amount of gold or the wrong amount of threat, might slip a word to a rival lord. The politics of medieval succession are like a chessboard with 1,000 pawns, and every royal bastard is both a potential king and a certain threat. Sometimes the baby doesn't even make it out of the chamber alive. Some nights the midwife is ordered to take care of things, and the only trace left of the birth is a cold, damp cloth and a hurried prayer for mercy. If this feels harsh, well, medieval politics make modern office politics look like a preschool cupcake party. If, by some miracle, or let's say a sudden change of heart, the mother or her protectors decide to risk keeping the child alive, a flurry of decisions must be made in minutes. Should the child be spirited away to a distant village, raised in anonymity, never to know their true parentage? Should he or she be smuggled into a monastery, consigned to a life of silent prayer and bread crusts, hidden from the world but spared the sword? Or in rare cases could the child be quietly adopted by a trusted retainer, given a new name and a new life, always living in the shadow of a secret? For the mother, every moment is agony. Even after the ordeal of childbirth, she's not out of danger. A single slip, a fevered whisper, a letter intercepted, an overheard confession during confession, and her own life might be forfeit. It's not just her reputation at stake. Noblemen have been known to punish mistresses and even wives with exile, imprisonment, or worse, to erase any evidence of scandal, and that's if she's lucky. Sometimes a noble woman falls ill and never recovers. Medieval medicine is conveniently vague about cause of death, but let's not paint all fathers as monsters. Sometimes the royal father, king, duke, or wandering prince wants to protect his illegitimate child. He may order the mother sent away for her health, or quietly sponsor the baby's upbringing in some remote estate. Occasionally these arrangements go off without a hitch. The child grows up believing himself the son of a minor noble, never knowing he's a thread in the grand tapestry of royal bloodlines. But more often, the very act of hiding the child creates a trail. A money transfer here, a shipment of fine cloth there, that alert rivals or opportunists sniff out like bloodhounds. Meanwhile, outside the castle walls, rumours begin to spread. Maybe a maid saw the lady's belly grow round, and then flat again, with no sign of a cradle in the nursery. Maybe a stable boy overheard a nurse crying, or perhaps a local priest, noticing an unexpected donation, wonders why a prominent family suddenly seems very interested in funding a new altar cloth. In the end, secrets in medieval courts are like leaky roofs in English rainstorms, bound to give way, sooner or later. For the baby, every milestone, first smile, first steps, first word, is a countdown to potential discovery. Every visitor is a possible spy. Every cough a reason for panic. If the child falls ill and requires a doctor, will the physician keep the secret, or will he barter that knowledge for favour at court? The castle itself becomes a cage of whispers, and childhood innocence is an illusion. You may have been born with royal blood, but you'll never be allowed to forget the bastard brand, even if the child survives the first perilous months. The spectre of doom never really fades. Rival noble factions, always hungry for leverage, keep eyes and ears open for any hint of a new claimant to the throne. The more powerful the parent, the more valuable and dangerous the child. The line between precious heir and problematic bastard is razor thin, and easily crossed by the whims of a jealous queen or a paranoid king. It's not just a matter of inheritance or power. In medieval Europe, where kings claimed to rule by divine right, even the suggestion of royal infidelity or illegitimate offspring was a threat to the entire idea of order. If a king's mistress could bear a child with royal blood, what did that say about God's plan? What did it say about the queen's authority or the line of succession? In a society obsessed with order, hierarchy, and the illusion of moral purity, a bastard was more than an inconvenience. They were a living accusation, a question mark that couldn't be erased by a scribe's pen. Sometimes the wider family gets dragged in. Cousins, uncles, even loyal retainers are asked, sometimes ordered to keep the secret or else. But every new person brought in is another weak link. Some are loyal to the grave, others have their own ambitions, or simply decide the risk is too great. The web of secrecy grows, but so does the danger of exposure. You, if you were part of this shadowy drama, might find yourself doing things you never imagined. Bribing a guard, hiding letters, forging records, even in moments of desperate fear, turning on those you once trusted. Medieval morality is as flexible as a contortionist when survival is on the line. Sometimes the only hope for a royal bastard is distance. If the child can be spirited away, perhaps to another kingdom, perhaps to a distant monastery, there's a slim chance they might live out their days in obscurity. But the world is smaller than you think, and bloodlines are stubborn things. A royal face, a family trait, a distinctive nose, a stubborn chin, has a way of betraying its origins, no matter how carefully you try to hide. And so, as the hours crawl toward dawn, the castle settles into a tense, brittle silence. The guards are weary. The midwife's hands shake as she washes the blood from her apron. The mother, pale and hollow-eyed, stares at the flickering shadows on the wall, already mourning the future her child will never have. The newborn sleeps, if you can call it sleep, swaddled in anonymity, his destiny shaped by forces older and colder than any human heart. Out in the town, roosters will crow soon, and a new day will begin. But inside these walls, the price of royal blood has already been paid, and the debt will hang over this place for generations. If you're lucky, you'll never have to know what it's like to be born with a crown-shaped curse, hunted from the moment you first draw breath. You wake to a world where bloodlines are everything, where the difference between living like a king and dying in a ditch can come down to a whispered rumor about your father's nighttime wanderings. Medieval kings, those proud, powdered, heavily perfumed rulers whose portraits still glower from museum walls, are haunted not only by wars and famine, but by a single insidious fear, the threat of rival bloodlines. You see, for every king seated on a gilded throne, there is a shadow behind him, cast by the children he never meant to acknowledge, the bastards whose very existence could ignite a civil war, topple a dynasty, or shatter the illusion of royal legitimacy. The problem is not just legal, it's existential. In the world of feudal Europe, blood is destiny. Who your father is, who your father says you are, determines everything, from the food you eat to the fate that awaits you when you're old enough to hold a sword. And for kings, bloodlines are more than family trees. They are maps of power, land and control. One illegitimate child is not a private embarrassment. It's a rolling grenade, tossed into the palace nursery. You can imagine the scene. The king sits late at night, candle guttering, his counsellors perched nervously on benches, their faces tight with worry. Maybe word has come again of a secret child born to a serving girl, a noble's daughter, or perhaps even a foreign princess. Each case is different, but the outcome is almost always the same: panic. What if the child grows up and claims a right to the throne? What if a rival lord seizes the boy, parades him before an army, and shouts, "Behold, the true king's blood runs in his veins"? In a world where armies march and swords are drawn at the drop of a disputed lineage, this is no idle threat. The king's fear is not entirely paranoia. The medieval era is littered with the bones of dynasties shattered by disputes over legitimacy. Consider the Plantagenets, the Capetians, or the Angevins. Families whose power could be unravelled by a single parchment letter or a rumour whispered in the right ear. The wrong child, the wrong time, and suddenly the map of Europe is redrawn. It's a world where your birth certificate might as well be written in blood. Official marriage, witnessed by church and nobility, was the only way to create true heirs. Any child born outside this framework was, legally and spiritually, an outsider. Not only did they lack inheritance rights, but their mere existence cast doubt on the purity of the royal line. The king's own anxiety is matched only by that of his queen. For a queen, an illegitimate child born to a rival woman, especially one with the king's features, is more than an insult. It's a threat to her children, her power, and sometimes her life. Imagine living each day knowing that somewhere out there, a child with your husband's blood might grow up to challenge your own son's claim. Even a rumour could set off a storm of intrigue, poisonings, or worse. To counter this, kings built elaborate networks of spies and informants. You couldn't swing a candelabra in a medieval court without hitting someone who owed their livelihood to keeping secrets, or revealing them at the right moment. In the bustling corridors of palaces, in the echoing halls of monasteries, in the musty backrooms of taverns, agents exchanged coin and information. Any hint of a royal bastard was tracked, documented, and if necessary eliminated, not because the child had done anything wrong, but because of what they represented, a possible alternative future. If you're thinking this all sounds a bit melodramatic, remember, in the Middle Ages, stories of hidden heirs and secret princes weren't just bedtime tales, they were instructions for coups. Pretenders could, and often did, rally whole armies around claims of royal blood, sometimes real, sometimes forged. The line between fairy tale and civil war was thin enough to slit your throat. Let's stroll for a moment through the smoky corridors of a real castle. The king's council meets in secret. The king, red-eyed from lack of sleep, demands answers. How many bastards are rumoured? Where are they? Who knows? Advisors scramble for information, their own necks on the line if they can't provide certainty. A nobleman in the shadows, desperate to ingratiate himself, claims he's found proof of a boy born to the king's old mistress, now living in a remote village under another name. This is not just an exercise in gossip. Every rumour is a potential war. In France, England, Castile, across all Europe, the history books are littered with uprisings led by those who claimed, rightly or wrongly, to be of royal descent. The king's worst nightmare is waking up to find half the countryside in rebellion, banners flying for a bastard son he never saw, armies willing to die for the possibility of a new order. Even when kings tried to be generous, their gifts were double-edged. Some monarchs acknowledged their illegitimate children, granted them land, titles or positions at court, but this too was fraught with danger. Elevate a bastard and you risk enraging the legitimate heirs, who see every new lord or lady as a dilution of their own inheritance. Ignore the child, and he might become a rallying point for opposition. There is, truly, no win. Let's have a little modern aside, just for fun. Imagine a world where your biggest problem is someone accidentally tagging you in a photo with the wrong person. Now multiply the consequences by 1,000 and replace awkward photo with potential war. That's the stress level of a medieval king. Sometimes kings issued proclamations, public denials, or edicts ordering that anyone found sheltering a royal bastard would be subject to severe punishment. The church was often enlisted as an ally. Priests and bishops thundered from the pulpit about the sanctity of marriage and the danger of illegitimate claimants, but even this wasn't enough. The mere suspicion of royal blood was enough to upend the political order. It wasn't only the royal family that feared rival bloodlines. Nobles had their own stakes. Many plotted to use bastards as pawns in their own games, marrying them to their daughters, or using them as figureheads in rebellions. For every king there were a dozen barons dreaming of a more pliable monarch, a child they could control, prop up, or discard when the time was right. To make matters worse, the medieval obsession with prophecy and omens meant that the birth of an illegitimate royal was often greeted with wild rumours. Was this child a sign of God's displeasure, a harbinger of civil war, or to some superstitious minds, a secret weapon sent by fate to right old wrongs? Even the weather on the night of a bastard's birth could be twisted into political fuel. A thunderstorm meant divine wrath. A clear night, perhaps, a sign that God had turned his face away. For you, if you're living this story, the tension is relentless. Every knock at the door could be a loyal friend or a hired assassin sent to solve the problem. The king's men ride out, sometimes under cover of darkness, to investigate rumours, threaten midwives, interrogate servants. The fear is not just for the child, but for anyone who might have seen, heard, or guessed the truth. Let's picture an unlucky household where a bastard is hidden. Maybe the lord and lady are friends of the king, or perhaps the mother is a cousin, hoping for royal protection. The walls have ears, though, and soon a messenger arrives, summoned to court, questioned under oath, watched for signs of guilt. Sometimes just being suspected is enough to end a family's fortunes. A single accusation could see whole estates confiscated, men imprisoned, women sent to convents, children scattered to distant relatives, or worse. It's not just noble families who are at risk. In some cases, entire villages were punished for harbouring a royal bastard. In an era without newspapers, rumours were the main currency, and accusations spread like wildfire. If the king was feeling generous, he might forgive. If not, he might order a public execution, just to send a message. These stories, passed down from parent to child, served as a chilling warning: don't meddle in royal affairs, and above all, never cross the bloodline. All of this, of course, takes a toll on the king himself. Imagine the crushing paranoia, wondering every day if someone somewhere is plotting to use your own blood against you. It's a level of anxiety that makes modern political scandals look almost quaint. Sleep is a luxury. Trust is rarer still. Even close advisors can't be fully relied upon. After all, who knows where their loyalties truly lie? In the rare cases where a royal bastard is found and presented to the king, the decision is agonizing. Mercy might mean sparing the child's life, but ensuring he never comes near the court. Severity might mean ordering the death of an innocent, sometimes justified by the needs of the realm. Either way, there's no escaping the consequences. Every decision echoes down through the years, shaping not only the fate of the bastard, but the entire kingdom. It's worth noting that some kings tried to turn the problem on its head by legitimizing their bastards, bringing them into the royal fold. This, too, was fraught with peril. The most famous case might be William the Conqueror himself, known for centuries as William the Bastard, who managed to seize the throne of England despite or because of his questionable parentage. But for every William, there were dozens of forgotten children, whose only inheritance was a grave in an unmarked field. Let's not forget the Queen, trapped in her own labyrinth of fear and suspicion. For her, the king's infidelities are not just personal betrayals, they are existential threats. Her children's futures depend on her ability to fend off rivals, both legitimate and not. In some cases, queens formed their own networks, tracking down rivals, buying silence, or in extreme cases, arranging for accidents to befall inconvenient children. It's not a world for the faint of heart. Meanwhile, the church watches from the sidelines, alternately condemning and condoning, depending on the politics of the moment. Priests, bishops, and abbots can be powerful allies or dangerous enemies. A priest who knows too much about a royal bastard might find himself well rewarded for his silence, or quickly transferred to a distant parish if he talks too much. Sometimes the church offered sanctuary, other times it handed over children to the king's men with little more than a blessing and a shrug. The end result is a world where everyone is suspicious. Every birth is a potential crisis, and every child, no matter how innocent, is a piece on a game board few can see, and fewer still can survive. The king's fear of rival bloodlines shapes everything. The laws of inheritance, the rituals of court, the architecture of castles, even the music and stories that fill the air on long winter nights. If you're lying in bed now, listening to this tale and feeling grateful for your own unremarkable family tree, count yourself lucky. In medieval Europe, even being born was a political act, and your survival was never guaranteed. The next time you see a royal portrait, remember, behind every crowned head, there are shadows. Shadows full of secrets, betrayals, and the ever-present fear of what might happen if the wrong bloodline rises up to claim the throne. So you drift back to sleep, imagining the flicker of candlelight on stone walls, the soft creak of boots in the corridor, and the uneasy silence that falls whenever royal blood is involved. You can almost hear the heartbeat of a king pounding with the fear that somewhere out there, in the dark, his own blood might come back to haunt him. There's a moment in every medieval king's reign, a moment that most never speak of, but all secretly dread, when a scrap of parchment lands on their desk, stamped with the wax seal of a trusted noble or a high-ranking clergyman. The handwriting is cramped, the message brief, but the meaning is unmistakable. There is news of a birth, and not the sort you celebrate with trumpets. Perhaps a serving girl has grown mysteriously round, or a young widow has vanished for a suspicious 9 months. Perhaps someone, somewhere, has let slip a dangerous secret about a night spent in the king's chambers, and now with trembling hands, a royal advisor brings the report to the sovereign himself. It is in these moments that the king's mask slips, if only for a heartbeat. Beneath the crown and ermine, he is a man beset by a fear more primal than the threat of battle, fear for his legacy, his bloodline, and his hold on power. With a single, clipped command, he might decide the fate of a child he'll never see, issuing a royal decree that will ripple through every corridor, chapel, and hovel in the land. Royal decrees were the medieval equivalent of a thunderbolt from Mount Olympus. Once issued, they had a terrible, almost divine authority. These orders didn't travel with the speed of a smartphone notification, but their impact was felt all the same, delivered by a messenger on horseback, unfurling the king's will before a trembling audience. Sometimes the decrees were blunt, let the child be removed. Sometimes they were cloaked in vague legalistic language. No illegitimate offspring of the crown shall survive to trouble the peace of this realm. And sometimes when the mood was particularly dark, they included a list of names. Mothers, midwives, nurses, and anyone else suspected of involvement, all marked for special handling. If you were a scribe at court, you might be the first to see these commands. Your quill would scratch out the king's orders in precise, unyielding script. No room for ambiguity, no space for mercy. Then the document would be sealed, rolled, and sent on its way, carried by a trusted agent who'd been told exactly what to say, and just as importantly, what not to say, if anyone dared ask questions. In the world beyond the palace, royal decrees landed like stones in a pond. First, there was a shocked silence. Then came the frantic whispers, the hasty meetings behind closed doors, the hurried journeys down muddy roads to warn or betray. The very arrival of a royal decree sent a chill through the household. It meant the king was watching, and that someone's life or many lives was about to change. Picture a village outside London, or a manor in Burgundy, where a young woman has just given birth in secret. The midwife, already anxious, recognizes the coat of arms on the messenger's tunic. She wipes her hands on her apron, hoping her knees will stop shaking. As the messenger delivers the folded parchment and waits, the noble lord opens the seal, reads the words, and for a moment, everyone's breath stops. In some cases, the order is clear and final. The child is to be found and removed, a euphemism as cold as the winter wind. But the cruelty of these decrees lay not just in their content, but in their unpredictability. Sometimes, the king's mood softened, perhaps out of guilt, or superstition, or a whispered plea from a powerful friend. A few royal bastards were granted safe passage to a monastery, or allowed to live as servants in distant lands. Others were sent to remote castles, watched and kept, neither fully prisoner nor free. Yet even these rare reprieves were fraught with danger. A change of king, a new political alliance, and the problem might resurface at the worst possible moment. For most, however, there was no such mercy. Execution was the bluntest tool in the royal arsenal, and while it was rarely advertised, it was always understood. In some cases the orders were carried out quietly: a nighttime disappearance, a tragic accident, a burial at the edge of the churchyard with no marker. In others, the message was meant to be seen and feared: the public hanging of a nurse accused of conspiring to conceal the king's sin, or the burning of a midwife on charges of witchcraft. These acts were designed to terrify as much as to punish. Let's pause here for a modern aside. If you've ever tried to sneak a snack from the kitchen without your parents knowing, imagine doing it while the king is actively paying people to catch you, and rewarding them for making sure you never do it again. Suddenly, midnight cookies don't seem so risky, do they? Back in the medieval world, royal decrees didn't stop at the guilty. They swept up the innocent as well. Fathers who never knew their daughters were pregnant, brothers who tried to protect their sisters, villagers who offered a bed for the night. Sometimes entire families vanished under suspicion of sheltering a royal bastard, their homes razed or lands confiscated as a warning to others. And yet, despite the terror, rumours always found a way to survive. Some whispered that the king's men had overreached, killing children who weren't royal at all. Better to err on the side of caution than let a true rival slip through. Others claimed that a few lucky bastards were smuggled to safety, spirited away in barrels or disguised as peasant children, destined to one day return and seek revenge. You might wonder if all kings were equally ruthless. The answer, of course, is no. There were as many styles of rule as there were crowns in Europe. Some monarchs preferred negotiation, bribing the mothers or offering quiet retirements in distant abbeys. Others took a more hands-on approach, sending trusted men to oversee the elimination personally. But whether by blade or bribe, the goal was always the same: protect the bloodline at any cost. Even queens could become entangled in this web of secrecy and violence. A queen who discovered her husband's infidelity and the existence of a royal bastard faced a grim choice. Should she turn a blind eye, hoping the child would simply disappear, or should she act, using her own network of spies and loyal servants to eliminate the threat before it grew? Some queens became as feared as their husbands, orchestrating plots that would make any modern crime drama look like amateur hour. Now, imagine the terror for the mother. She holds her newborn close, knowing that any day could be their last together. Every knock at the door, every letter bearing the royal seal, could mean the end. The urge to flee is strong, but the world outside is just as dangerous. There are spies everywhere, and nowhere is truly safe. Even the church, which promises sanctuary, cannot always be trusted. Priests can be bribed, and abbots know which side their bread is buttered on. Sometimes a mother's only hope is to confess, to beg for mercy in person, hoping her tears will move the king. This is a desperate gamble. The king might spare the child, but more often he'll see the plea as confirmation of the threat. The best a mother can hope for is a quiet exile, her child taken from her and raised by strangers, never to know his or her true parentage. For the child, all of this is invisible at first. But as they grow, questions start to gnaw. Why are there so many secrets? Why do the adults flinch at certain names or fall silent at the mention of the king? Some children are old enough to remember the night they were taken away, the hurried journey in a creaking cart, the whispered promises that someday things will be different. Others only sense the anxiety that clings to them like a second skin, a feeling that they don't quite belong, that something in their blood makes them dangerous. In the end, royal decrees did more than kill children. They created generations of fear, suspicion, and silence. They divided families, destroyed friendships, and left scars that never truly healed. Even centuries later, stories of royal bastards and their grim fates haunt the folklore of Europe, a reminder that power is a cruel master and that blood, for all its promise, can just as easily be a curse. If you're listening now, drifting towards sleep, try to picture the sound of a royal decree being read aloud in a hushed hall, the crackle of parchment, the trembling voice, the sense of fate closing in like a cold wind. And as you pull your blankets a little tighter, be glad your own family secrets aren't written in the king's hand, sealed with wax, and delivered by a messenger who never forgets a face. But in the candlelit world of medieval Europe, the next decree is always on its way, silent, inevitable, and deadly as the dawn. The baptismal font glimmers in the darkness of a country chapel, the only light the flicker of tallow candles and the quivering breath of those gathered. It is not a grand cathedral with high vaults and ringing bells, but a squat stone building at the edge of the forest, a place chosen less for its holiness than for its isolation. The hour is late, the night silent except for the distant hoot of an owl and the faint trickle of water from the nearby stream. Here, the fate of an infant hangs by a thread, because in medieval Europe, even a baptism could be an act of dangerous defiance. Tonight's ceremony is nothing like the joyous public affairs you might imagine from medieval manuscripts, with the local lord and lady beaming as a fat-cheeked baby receives a Christian name before a crowd of godparents and villagers. Instead, there are only a handful of people present: the anxious mother, face pale under her hood, a loyal retainer clutching the child, the priest, his voice barely above a whisper as he recites sacred words, and the ever-watchful midwife, who stands by the door, ready to raise the alarm if hoofbeats sound in the night. Why such secrecy? Because baptizing a royal bastard is a political act. On paper, the church taught that every soul deserved the cleansing waters of baptism. Original sin, after all, did not discriminate between princes and paupers, but in practice the line between salvation and scandal was thin, and to baptize a royal bastard was to acknowledge their existence. Once the name is spoken, once the holy water has touched the baby's brow, the child's soul is officially part of the Christian flock, and that means the king, or his enemies, now has one more name to add to their lists. You stand at the edge of the chapel, your cloak pulled tight, watching as the priest dips his fingers into the font. The child barely whimpers, too young to sense the tension. The mother stifles a sob, caught between relief that her baby's soul is safe and terror that this very act might seal their doom. The priest hurries through the ritual, skipping the grand gestures, leaving out the incense and the bells. There will be no christening feast, no silver gifts, no songs. When it's over, the priest wraps the child in coarse cloth, hands him silently to the mother, and makes the sign of the cross over all present. Not just as a blessing, but as a prayer that they'll survive the week. Sometimes these ceremonies are even more hurried. A midwife may dash to a nearby well and perform an emergency baptism herself, just in case things turn for the worse. If the baby is in danger of dying before the priest arrives, the midwife's whispered blessing is believed to be enough to save the soul. But the body? That's another matter entirely. The risks don't end at the church door. Even after a successful secret baptism, Everyone involved is haunted by the fear of discovery. Baptismal records are dangerous things. One wrong entry, one curious clerk, and the secret is out. Some families bribe the priest to leave the book blank, or to record a false name and parentage. Others destroy the records entirely, burning pages in the hearth and hoping the smoke won't carry whispers to the castle. It's not just the child at risk. The priest who dares to baptize a royal bastard without official approval risks excommunication, or worse, a quiet visit from the king's men. Some clergymen are willing to take the risk, out of pity, piety, or the promise of a heavy purse. Others turn a blind eye, pretending not to see the desperation in the mother's eyes, or the resemblance between the infant's face and the royal portraits hanging in the local manor. Occasionally, despite every precaution, word gets out. Maybe a local farmer saw the group slip into the chapel at midnight. Maybe a chatty sacristan recognizes the seal on the mother's ring, or a gossiping widow notices the hurried departure of a priest from his bed. In small towns, secrets are as rare as fresh fruit in February. Once suspicion is aroused, the wheels of danger begin to turn. Spies and informants are everywhere, their ears always hungry for a tale to sell. The king's agents, moving quietly through the countryside, pay handsomely for news of unusual baptisms. Sometimes the king isn't the only one interested. Rival nobles, jealous queens, or even foreign agents may want to find the child first, each for their own ends. A royal bastard is both a liability and a prize. Let's lighten the mood for a second. Imagine trying to throw a surprise birthday party, except that if anyone finds out, they'll not only ruin the surprise, but might also arrest your guests and torch your house. That's the level of stress running through every shadowed chapel and cold manor hall on these secret nights. But the need for secrecy also means these baptisms create a peculiar kind of bond. Those present become conspirators in a shared risk, a fellowship forged by fear. The midwife and the priest, the retainer and the mother, they are tied together by a story they must never repeat. Sometimes the only way to keep the secret is to send each person in a different direction afterward, breaking up the fellowship before it's even begun. For the child, of course, none of this is apparent. They grow up, if they're lucky, believing themselves the son or daughter of a commoner, never guessing their connection to a crown. Others are raised in distant monasteries, taught to read and pray, never knowing why their education is funded so generously, or why strangers sometimes visit in the dead of night. There are other dangers lurking even after a successful baptism. Sometimes the secret is kept for years, only to unravel in a moment of carelessness. A priest, dying and racked with guilt, may confess the truth to a superior. A midwife, embittered by poverty or seeking revenge, may reveal the secret for coin. Or the child, now grown, may discover a long-forgotten document, a ring, a letter, and begin to ask dangerous questions. Medieval society is built on memory, on who remembers what, and how those memories are passed down. In an age without secure archives, secrets live and die in the stories told by those who survive. A royal bastard's baptism performed in a candlelit chapel on a stormy night may echo for generations, reshaping the fate of whole kingdoms. But for every secret baptism, there are 10 that end in tragedy. Sometimes the king's men arrive before the ceremony is complete. The child is snatched from its mother's arms, the priest arrested, the church doors barred against any attempt at rescue. There are stories of entire villages punished for sheltering a single infant, of priests hanged from their own belfries, of mothers condemned to lifelong penance in distant nunneries. And yet, the need for these clandestine ceremonies never disappears. The royal bedchamber is not a place of perfect fidelity, and the ambitions of nobles and servants alike mean that royal bastards will always be born, always wanted by someone, always hunted by someone else. Sometimes the church itself is caught in a bind. On the one hand, it teaches mercy and forgiveness. On the other, it is deeply enmeshed in the power politics of the age. A powerful bishop might turn a blind eye to a secret baptism if the family is wealthy enough, or if he stands to gain favour at court. A reforming abbot, by contrast, might denounce everyone involved, hoping to curry favour with the king, or simply to prove his own righteousness. In rare cases, the baptism becomes a rallying cry. If a royal bastard survives and is later discovered by enemies of the king, his baptism recorded, witnessed, and confirmed becomes the basis for rebellion. He was christened, the conspirators will whisper. He is legitimate in the eyes of God, even if not in the eyes of men, and thus, the humble water poured in a forgotten chapel may someday become the spark for war. Other times the baptism is forgotten entirely, lost in the fog of history. The child dies young, or vanishes into the crowd, and the secret is buried with those who kept it. The old chapel crumbles, the font gathers moss, and no one remembers the night when a king's sin was washed away by holy water and fear. Yet, the risk is always there, a shadow at the edge of every joy, for every noble mother who dares to risk her life for her child, for every priest who performs a ceremony with trembling hands, for every midwife who prays she will not be found out. There are countless others who pay the ultimate price. The medieval world, for all its beauty and ceremony, is a world where the most private moments are shaped by the public terror of power. Still, for one brief instant, in the hush of a secret chapel, hope flickers. The baby cries, the priest whispers ancient words, and those present feel, for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, the power of faith can shelter them from the storm outside. But as the candles burn down and the shadows grow longer, everyone knows that dawn brings questions, and that no secret, however sacred, is safe for long. You linger a moment longer in that chapel, feeling the cool air, hearing the nervous shuffle of feet, the tiny sighs of the infant, the crackle of wax on stone. Then, as the little group slips away into the darkness, the world resumes its cold, relentless march, and somewhere, not far away, a messenger is already saddling his horse, a royal seal in his satchel, carrying orders that may erase every trace of what happened here tonight. Such is the price of royal blood, and of a name whispered over water, in the hope that against all odds, it might save a soul. You blink awake in a world where trust is as scarce as sunlight in a dungeon. The moment a royal bastard enters the world, no matter how quietly, no matter how far from the palace, every ear in every village, every court, every crumbling tavern seems to grow larger, hungry for a whiff of scandal. But it's not just idle gossip that stalks these children, it's an entire machinery of surveillance, intrigue and betrayal. You soon learn that in medieval Europe, there are always spies and informants tracking illegitimate children, because information in these times is just as deadly as a dagger. Imagine yourself as a child, perhaps 6 or 7, living in the outskirts of a rural estate. Maybe you don't know your father's name, but the adults around you seem tense, glancing over their shoulders at every sound. Your mother says little and keeps you indoors when strangers pass. You're taught to avoid certain roads, to never speak of the past, to look down at your feet when visitors arrive. Childhood should be a time of innocence, but for the children of kings and nobles born in the wrong bed, it's a time of careful rehearsal. Every gesture, every word, could be a clue that brings disaster. This isn't paranoia. In royal courts there are entire networks of informants. Some official, many not. Kings, always wary, employ searchers, trusted agents, who move quietly through the countryside, slipping into market crowds, loitering in churchyards, paying careful attention to local rumours. They ask seemingly harmless questions. Has the baker's daughter been missing lately? Who was that new nursemaid in the baron's household? Did the old priest really die of fever, or was he silenced for what he knew? Sometimes it's as simple as a few coins tossed to a chatty stable boy, or an innkeeper's wife. But not all informants are professionals. Some are desperate peasants, trying to curry favour with a local lord or escape a charge of their own. Others are minor nobles with their own ambitions, hoping to prove their loyalty to the crown by unearthing inconvenient secrets. There's always a price on information, and in a world where famine or plague can sweep away entire villages, people do what they must to survive. If you've ever been part of a big family, you know how quickly news spreads. In medieval Europe, multiply that by the power of desperation. A single whisper in a tavern, the baby with the king's eyes, a midwife who won't answer questions, can set off a chain reaction that ends with armoured riders thundering down a village lane. The king's agents are ruthless, but so are his rivals. Every potential bastard is both a threat and an opportunity, and the scramble to find them is relentless. For the mother of such a child, every day is a test of nerves. She may have been promised protection by a powerful lover, but she soon learns that protection is conditional and can vanish in a moment. Some women are clever, inventing cover stories and moving constantly, never settling in one place for too long. Others rely on a trusted circle of friends or family, but even the tightest circle can be penetrated by a single well-placed bribe, or by fear. And when the secret finally leaks, it spreads faster than the morning fog. Meanwhile, in the great halls and candlelit chambers of the royal court, there are other, more sophisticated informants. Courtiers, ambitious, sharp-eyed, always jockeying for position, make it their business to know every secret worth selling. The cleverest may not report what they know immediately. Instead, they keep it in their pocket, waiting for the perfect moment to use the information as leverage in some private intrigue. It's not uncommon for a noble to discover the existence of a royal bastard at the precise moment it most benefits them, ensuring that the revelation causes maximum chaos for a rival and maximum favor from the king. If you want to survive in this world, you have to think several steps ahead. Servants are paid extra to keep their ears open. Priests are quietly threatened or bribed to betray their own confessional vows. Letters are intercepted, torn open, copied, resealed. Sometimes an entire household is placed under watch, with agents posing as merchants, musicians, or even monks. It's not just the adults who live in fear. Older children, especially those who begin to resemble their royal fathers, must be coached to avoid questions about their background. They learn early that their hair color, their accent, even the way they walk can attract unwanted attention. In some households, children are deliberately disguised. Hair dyed, clothing chosen to be as plain as possible. The goal is always the same: blend in, never stand out. But the irony is, secrecy itself is suspicious. A family that is too guarded, too withdrawn, draws the attention of both neighbors and authorities. Sometimes the best way to hide a royal bastard is not to hide at all. Let the child run barefoot with the rest, scuffed and muddy, just another face in the crowd. Yet all it takes is one slip, a careless boast, a family resemblance noted by a visitor, a letter intercepted, and everything changes. Let's lighten things up with a quick modern joke. If you think your parents are strict for checking your text messages, imagine living in a world where forgetting your fake last name could get you, your friends, and your neighbors questioned by the king's men. As for the spies themselves, their motivations are as varied as their disguises. Some are hardened professionals, men and women who have spent years moving quietly through the kingdoms, rewarded handsomely for every secret unearthed. Others are pressed into service, blackmailed or threatened with ruin, unless they report what they know. There are stories of monks who lead double lives, gentle, silent in the cloister, but passing coded messages to royal agents when they travel. Even children are not exempt. A clever boy who overhears a dangerous secret might be given a coin or a sweet, only to find himself the unwitting trigger for a family's destruction. The methods are endless. Secret codes scratched into the wax of a candle, messages hidden in loaves of bread, clandestine meetings in graveyards and alehouses. Some spies are so skilled that they can uncover a secret pregnancy before even the mother knows, piecing together gossip and scraps of evidence with frightening accuracy. The result is a web of surveillance so dense that it is almost miraculous when a royal bastard manages to reach adulthood unscathed. But the search is not always just for children. Sometimes the king's agents are hunting for women rumoured to be pregnant, or for men suspected of fathering royal bastards who might one day claim kinship. Whole families can become targets: a noble woman's sudden retreat to a remote estate, a midwife's unexplained wealth, a servant's nervousness. All are clues to be followed up with dogged persistence. And, as always, there are those who try to use the system for their own ends. A rival noble eager to see a competitor disgraced may plant rumours of an illegitimate birth, forcing the king to act. Some cunning individuals have been known to pass off unrelated children as royal bastards, hoping to win favour or provoke scandal. In this world, truth and lies are entwined, and sometimes the biggest danger is not the actual existence of a royal bastard, but the mere suspicion of one. For the agents themselves, the work is hazardous. Fail to find the truth, and you might be accused of incompetence, or worse, complicity. Discover the wrong secret, and you could become a target yourself. Some spies, burned by the risk, disappear into obscurity. Others thrive, moving up the ranks until they are feared by commoners and nobles alike. For those being hunted, every day is an ordeal. Some mothers become masters of disguise, moving from town to town, changing names, trusting no one. Some children are sent across borders, into the care of distant relatives or foreign monasteries. The farther from the king's reach, the better. But even then, spies have a way of finding their quarry. The most tragic stories are those in which the child never even knows they are in danger. There are tales of young boys and girls living humble lives, who are suddenly plucked from their beds by armed men, never to be seen again. The local villagers might guess the reason, but no one dares to ask questions. In a world where rumors can be fatal, silence is the best defense. Of course, not all informants are motivated by malice. Some genuinely believe they are protecting the realm, preserving the rightful order, ensuring peace. Others act out of fear or desperation, caught between loyalty to their neighbours and the terrible power of the crown. In a way, they are as much victims of the system as those they betray, and so the game continues. Year after year, reign after reign, new kings rise, new bastards are born, new networks of spies are spun. Some children grow up and escape the net, carving out lives of quiet anonymity or, rarely, bold rebellion. Others vanish, their stories lost to time, their names erased from the chronicles. If you drift asleep now, imagine yourself moving through the medieval world, keeping your voice low, your eyes watchful, your secrets hidden deep. Every step, every word, is a risk. The world outside your window is not just a tapestry of forests, fields, and castles, but a labyrinth of whispers, warnings, and betrayals. The only thing more dangerous than royal blood is the knowledge of its existence. And in this game, you never quite know who is watching or what price will be paid for a single careless word. You might even hear, just as you start to dream, the distant echo of hoofbeats in the night, a reminder that somewhere out there, a spy has already set your fate in motion. You might think the greatest risk in this midnight world belongs to the royal bastard or the anxious mother, but in truth, those who help them walk the sharpest edge of all, the people who deliver, hide, feed, and care for these children, midwives, nurses, wet nurses, housemaids, even the old woman who brings broth to the bedside, live with dread that is heavier than any golden crown. Their lives are a daily gamble, every act of kindness balanced against the looming threat of brutal punishment if discovered. Let's start with the midwife, that eternal figure in the shadows of history. She is called in the dead of night, summoned with a knock at the door and a hurried word. No matter how skilled or kind, she understands immediately that this is no ordinary delivery. Perhaps she recognizes the lady from the manor, or notices the guards outside, or simply feels the tension in the air as she enters the hidden chamber. She works quickly, quietly, aware that the walls themselves seem to hold their breath. The baby arrives, the umbilical cord is cut, the mother's face is wiped clean. If luck holds, the child's first cry is quickly hushed. Then the real labor begins, keeping the secret. In medieval Europe, midwives are trusted, but not immune. Their place in the community depends on discretion and luck. Some become renowned for their skill, others are feared for the secrets they keep. But when it comes to royal bastards, discretion is not just a virtue, it is a matter of life and death. A single slip, a word spoken in the wrong ear, a lingering glance at the child's features, a name written too clearly in a ledger, can bring disaster. When the secret is out, the midwife is often the first to be questioned. King's agents are trained to root out complicity, and midwives know too much. The questions start gently. Who else was present? Did anyone see you come? But they rarely stay gentle for long. Threats, intimidation, and if the agents are truly desperate, physical torture may follow. In some notorious cases, midwives are tortured until they confess to crimes real or imagined. Not only conspiracy to conceal a birth, but even accusations of witchcraft or sorcery. Why so harsh? Because in this world, knowledge is more dangerous than poison. Midwives have been known to sell information for gold, or to use their power to manipulate families. The mere suspicion that a midwife aided in hiding a royal bastard can bring a swift, brutal end, hanging, drowning, burning at the stake. The spectacle of a midwife's punishment serves a double purpose: to terrify others into silence, and to erase any lingering evidence. Let's shift to the wet nurse, a woman chosen to feed and nurture the infant when the mother cannot or dares not. Wet nurses often come from humble backgrounds, sometimes peasants themselves, sometimes women who have lost their own children. To be chosen for such a task is both an honour and a mortal risk. The nurse may be moved into a separate household, sworn to secrecy, perhaps even given a new name. She loves the child as nurses often do, but every embrace, every lullaby is shadowed by the knowledge that discovery means death. Nurses, too, are subject to interrogation and suspicion. If a child is found, especially one whose features hint at royal blood, the nurse may be arrested alongside the mother, accused of raising a threat to the crown. Even those who do everything right can be punished, simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In a famous case from 14th century Castile, 3 nurses were hanged in the town square after a royal bastard was uncovered in their care. Their only crime was failing to report what they knew. Household servants are not spared either. The maid who sweeps the floors, the cook who prepares meals, the stable boy who helps with a secret journey, all can find themselves drawn into the vortex of suspicion. In noble houses, servants are the eyes and ears of both their employers and the crown. If a servant is caught keeping a secret, or even suspected of doing so, they may vanish overnight, their fate unmarked and unmourned. Sometimes whole households are broken up and scattered, the innocent punished alongside the guilty. Even the local clergy are at risk. Priests who perform secret baptisms or who shelter mothers and children in the church are treading a narrow line. The church proclaims mercy, but is entangled with the politics of power. A priest caught protecting a royal bastard may be defrocked, imprisoned, or handed over to secular authorities for justice. Monks and nuns who shelter such children face exile or worse. Yet, despite all the dangers, many people take the risk. Why? Sometimes it is for gold. There is always someone willing to pay for silence or help. Sometimes it is for loyalty, or love, or pity. Sometimes it is because they see the child not as a political threat, but as an innocent deserving of life. Whatever their reasons, those who help royal bastards are the unsung heroes and martyrs of this shadowy history. Of course, not all who are suspected are actually guilty. In times of high suspicion, mere association is enough to draw attention. A midwife who attended the wrong delivery, a nurse who worked for a disgraced noble, a priest whose sermons were deemed too sympathetic. Any could find themselves accused and punished, their innocence irrelevant. Let's not forget the elaborate precautions people took to avoid discovery. Midwives developed their own secret codes. Certain herbs left by a bedside, knots tied in a particular way, even special songs sung to signal danger or safety. Wet nurses would sometimes swap children, presenting the wrong baby if questioned, or claim to have lost the child to illness. Servants might invent elaborate stories about visitors or household movements, covering their tracks with the skill of practiced actors. The penalties for getting caught were designed not only to punish, but to set an example. In some regions, midwives found guilty of aiding royal bastards were stripped naked and paraded through the streets before execution. Nurses were sometimes forced to watch as the child was taken away or killed, a final act of cruelty meant to break any spirit of resistance. Priests and monks were dragged from their churches and tried before both religious and secular courts, a double dose of shame. The fear ran so deep that, in many cases, people simply refused to help. A mother might find herself turned away from house after house, the doors slamming shut, as soon as her situation was understood. The few who dared risk everything were often those with nothing left to lose, or those moved by faith or desperation beyond the reach of fear. Of course, the risk wasn't only for those who helped. The relentless suspicion turned communities against themselves. Neighbors spied on neighbors, friends betrayed friends, families fell apart under the pressure of secrecy and threat. The atmosphere was toxic. Trust withered. The king's agents encouraged this suspicion, knowing that fear was the best way to ensure silence. And yet, life continued. Babies were born and raised, sometimes with the help of brave men and women who gambled everything for a secret hope. Some royal bastards survived, thanks to the sacrifices of those around them. Others were lost, casualties of a system that valued bloodlines more than humanity. Let's have a lighter moment. If you've ever fibbed to your parents about a broken vase and relied on your siblings' silence, multiply that anxiety by 1,000 and add a real risk of exile, torture, or worse. Suddenly, family secrets have a whole new meaning. To the survivors, memories of those days never faded. Midwives who escaped suspicion kept their stories close, passing them on only to those they trusted completely. Nurses who raised royal bastards sometimes went to their graves without ever revealing the truth. Priests who performed secret baptisms left cryptic notes in church records, hoping that someday someone would understand the meaning. For those who didn't survive, those whose courage was punished with death or disgrace, their stories became warnings. Their names, if remembered at all, were spoken in hushed tones as examples of what could happen if you stepped outside the rigid order of the world. But sometimes, in rare and miraculous moments, the truth came out in ways no one expected. Years or decades later, a hidden child might rise to claim their birthright, armed with letters, rings, or the testimony of a dying nurse. In those moments, the sacrifices of the past were finally honoured, and the risk had against all odds been worth it. The tragedy, of course, is that most did not get their happy ending. For every royal bastard who survived, there were dozens, hundreds, whose stories ended in darkness. The women and men who helped them did so knowing that they might never be thanked, never be remembered, never be mourned except in secret. You drift now into sleep, thinking of the quiet heroism of those midwives, nurses, and servants. You imagine their careful hands, their nervous glances, the silent prayers they whispered as they risked everything for a fragile, flickering life. In the end, their legacy is written not in history books but in the hearts of those they saved, and in the echo of every lullaby sung to a child whose name could never be spoken aloud. Sleep is hard to come by when the consequences of failure are public, spectacular, and intended to haunt a region for generations. For most of the actors in this drama, mothers, midwives, nurses, their greatest dread is not simply being caught, but being made an example of. Medieval Europe perfected the art of using public executions as warnings, and when it came to the question of royal bastards, the authorities did not hold back. Picture a square at dawn in a medieval city. The fog is just beginning to lift from the cobblestones, chickens squabble in the gutters, and townsfolk are drifting from their houses, rubbing their eyes and muttering about the cold. There is a sense of expectation, though, a shiver in the air that isn't just the weather. Men with halberds march into the centre, forcing back the crowd, clearing space. A wooden scaffold has been erected overnight, sometimes a gallows, sometimes a chopping block, sometimes in darker places, a bonfire stacked high with straw. You can smell the smoke from the torches before you see the condemned. If you're unlucky enough to be among those accused, perhaps a wet nurse who tried to spirit away a child, or a midwife rumoured to have delivered trouble, your heart pounds as you're marched through the jeering crowd. Sometimes the mother is there, pale and trembling, her eyes searching for mercy in a sea of faces. Sometimes, heartbreakingly, it's the child, a royal bastard judged too dangerous to live, paraded before the city as a living lesson in what happens to those who threaten the bloodline. These spectacles are never accidental. Kings and local rulers understood well the power of public execution as a warning. In an age before newspapers, before the internet, the sight of a gallows was a message written in blood. See this? Betray your king, harbour his enemies. This could be you. The method varied by region and ruler, but the message was always the same. The law is the law, and there will be no mercy for those who cross it. Let's not be coy. These executions could be gruesome. Hanging, beheading, burning at the stake, even the wheel or quartering for the worst traitors. Sometimes the bodies were left on display for days, crows pecking at the flesh, as a further reminder that royal blood, when illegitimate, was a deadly curse. In some cases the punishment was more creative. A nurse who cared for a royal bastard might have her tongue cut out, so she could never spread secrets again. A midwife found guilty could be branded or mutilated, her hands, the very tools of her trade, destroyed. For the common folk watching, these events were equal parts horror and theatre. Some came out of duty, others out of curiosity, still others to make sure they weren't next on the list. Children peered through the legs of their elders, learning a lesson that would stay with them for life. Merchants hawked bread and cider to the crowd, and someone always made a joke, half-hearted and nervous, to break the tension. But no one ever forgot the names or the faces of those executed for their part in the drama of royal blood. And here's where medieval rulers showed their cunning. Executions weren't always for the guilty, nor even for those most involved. Sometimes a scapegoat was needed, someone expendable, someone whose death would satisfy the crowd and draw attention away from those truly responsible. Innocent or not, if you were chosen, there was little you could do but meet your fate with as much dignity as you could muster. For royal bastards themselves, public execution was relatively rare, but when it happened, it was unforgettable. In times of civil strife or rebellion, a captured claimant to the throne might be marched through the capital, mocked, and executed with great ceremony. Chroniclers would record every detail, often exaggerating the child's arrogance or the crowd's delight in the spectacle. The lesson: no one is above the law, not even the blood of kings. It's easy, from a modern vantage, to see these acts as barbaric, but in a world with few police, no prisons as we know them, and a constant threat of disorder, rulers leaned hard on spectacle to keep the peace. When a public execution was called for, it was not just a punishment, but a performance, a calculated strike at the heart of popular memory. Let's break the tension for a second. Ever been grounded in front of your whole class for whispering during a test? Imagine that embarrassment scaled up 1,000-fold. Your punishment made a warning for an entire city. Suddenly, detention sounds like a vacation. Executions were only the final step in a long process of investigation, trial, and confession. Sometimes genuine, often forced. Interrogations were brutal, designed less to find the truth than to establish a story that suited the ruler's needs. Torture chambers in the depths of castles and city halls were busy places. Confess, the interrogator would say, and maybe your death will be quick. The accused might hold out, or might break immediately. In the end, it rarely mattered. Once accused, acquittal was almost unheard of. Public executions had another purpose. They offered closure for the frightened and the vengeful. Neighbours who had harboured suspicions could say, "Justice has been done." The king's men could assure their master that the threat was gone. Sometimes the dead were even denied burial in consecrated ground, their bodies cast into ditches or rivers, unwept and unmarked. Yet, amid all this terror, people did sometimes find ways to resist. In some regions, villagers would gather in the dark of night to pray for the souls of the executed, or to secretly bury the body and mark the grave with a single anonymous stone. Sometimes a priest would risk everything to bless the corpse, knowing that in God's eyes, mercy counted for more than any king's decree. But if you think this was only a matter for the lower classes, think again. The spectacle of punishment was designed to reach every rung of society. Even nobles could find themselves at the mercy of the king's justice if they were suspected of supporting, sheltering, or even knowing about a royal bastard. Titles could be stripped, lands confiscated, families scattered. The fear ran upward as well as down. Stories abound of those who watched such executions and vowed never to cross the crown. Children grew up remembering the cries, the stink of blood and smoke, and resolved never to speak out of turn. Mothers wept, fathers stood silent, and the wheels of power turned on, greased by terror and silence. The psychological impact was immense. The threat of public punishment seeped into every corner of daily life. It taught people to hide their true thoughts, to mistrust neighbours, to see danger everywhere. It bred a society of watchers and whisperers, in which even a hint of sympathy for the wrong child could destroy your life. And the legend of these executions lived on. Songs were written, some tragic, some mocking, about the nurse who dared, the child who suffered, the mother who mourned. Even centuries later, travellers would point to the spot in the marketplace and say, "That is where justice was done," as if the stones themselves remembered. It became part of the landscape, a warning woven into the very fabric of towns and cities. Yet, as grim as it all sounds, these stories also birthed a quiet rebellion. In the hearts of those who watched, a seed was planted, a conviction that power must not always have the last word. Whispered prayers, secret acts of kindness, small moments of courage persisted in the shadow of the gallows. The memory of the condemned, though used as a weapon by the powerful, became a source of hidden strength for the weak. As you fade towards sleep, imagine yourself standing in that crowd, feeling the chill, watching the faces around you. The punishment is meant for someone else, but the lesson is clear. Your safety is borrowed, your loyalty always under suspicion, your place in the world never guaranteed. Still, you hold on to your humanity, the quiet hope that one day the blood spilled here will give rise not to fear, but to mercy. As the echoes of the morning execution fade from the town square, life in the city and countryside resumes, at least on the surface. Yet, beneath the ordinary bustle, there simmers a quieter, colder punishment. The enforced disappearance and silence of mothers who had the misfortune to bear royal bastards. In medieval Europe, erasing the evidence of royal infidelity was just as important as destroying the illegitimate child. The cruel ingenuity of the age found its most chilling expression in the fate of these women who were not only punished, but systematically silenced and hidden away, often for life. If you were the mother of a royal bastard, your world might shrink overnight from the luxury of noble halls to the damp austerity of a convent. The decision might come by decree, or be presented as a choice: accept cloistered life or face open disgrace, and perhaps worse. In some cases, noble families acted preemptively, sending their daughters to monasteries as soon as rumors began to swirl. The act was shrouded in the language of repentance, but everyone knew the real reason. A vow of silence was the price for protecting a father's title, a husband's lands, a king's reputation. Imagine the process: a hurried journey by night, a last tearful embrace with a child you may never see again. No crowds now, no jeering, just the clatter of a carriage through country lanes, or a cold walk under the cover of darkness. You arrive at the heavy wooden gates of a nunnery, the iron knocker echoing like a final drumbeat. The doors open, and you pass inside, leaving behind your name, your past, and most painfully, your voice. Convents, on the surface, are havens of prayer and peace. To outsiders, they are places of holy refuge, ruled by ritual and devotion. But for the women forced inside to protect the secrets of the crown, these stone walls are both sanctuary and prison. You are given a new name, perhaps, or simply called sister. Your worldly possessions are stripped away, your letters censored or forbidden. In some orders, a vow of silence is literal. Days, weeks, or even years pass without a word spoken except in prayer. Your new world is measured in footsteps across cold flagstones, in the weight of a rosary in your palm, in the endless cycle of dawn and dusk beneath stained glass and candlelight. There are moments of grace, of course. Friendship among the sisters, small joys in the garden, the comfort of daily ritual. But for women sent here, not by choice, but as punishment and erasure, the walls close in. The grief is doubled by uncertainty. What has become of your child? Was he spirited away to safety, or lost to the king's wrath? Has your silence brought him a future, or has it doomed him to a lifetime of shadows? The policy of forced monastic silence was ruthlessly effective. Not only did it prevent further scandal, but it erased living witnesses. With the mother safely cloistered, she could not appear in court, sign legal documents, or make claims about paternity. The legal machinery of medieval Europe was easily manipulated. A few forged documents, a compliant abbot or bishop, and the world quickly forgot that the woman had ever been anything but a nun. Even if she survived for decades, her story would rarely make it beyond the cloister. Sometimes, when the king was especially anxious, the woman would be transferred from convent to convent, each move calculated to sever her from potential allies and keep her forever out of the public eye. The strategy was so common that entire orders of nuns became repositories for the secrets of the realm. It was joked in some circles that if the stones of the convent walls could talk, half the royal scandals of Europe would be revealed. The laughter, of course, was nervous. Everyone knew how many women lived their final years in enforced penance, their only crime the accident of catching the eye of a king. But not all women went quietly. Some, even within the walls, found ways to rebel, tiny acts of resistance in a system built for silence. A scrap of a letter smuggled out with a trusted merchant, a whispered confession to a visiting priest, a single act of kindness to another fallen sister whose story was much the same. Some left behind secret diaries or embroidered symbols in altar cloths, silent testimony to their lost voices. A handful even managed to escape, aided by sympathetic family or by bribed gatekeepers, though for most, escape was unthinkable. The church itself walked a delicate line. Officially, it welcomed these women as prodigals returning to grace, offering redemption and sanctuary. In reality, it often acted as a willing tool of royal and noble families, accepting generous donations in exchange for keeping certain sisters out of sight and out of mind. For every abbot or abbess who truly believed in mercy, there were others who relished the power to keep secrets, and a few who used their knowledge for blackmail and intrigue. For the wider world, the fate of these women was simply another whispered cautionary tale. Mothers warned their daughters to avoid the attentions of powerful men. Fathers watched their households for signs of trouble, fearing that a single night's passion could cost the family everything. Girls grew up hearing stories about the silent sisters, the mysterious nuns who had once worn velvet and pearls. Some pitied them, others despised them, but all understood the lesson: to be noticed by the wrong man could mean a life without a name or voice. And for the royal courts, the system worked exactly as intended. With the mothers hidden away, the trails of legitimacy grew colder. Future generations grew up knowing only the official histories, stories carefully edited to erase any mention of inconvenient births or mysterious disappearances. On rare occasions, a rumor would surface. A nun glimpsed at the edge of a family portrait, a dowry paid for a daughter who was never born. But for the most part, silence prevailed. Let's pause for a lighter note. Imagine your school sending you to the library for detention, then promptly losing the paperwork so no one remembers why you're there, what your name is, or when you'll ever get to leave. Now, multiply the stakes by the weight of a kingdom's reputation, and you've got a sense of the monastic fate that awaited royal mistresses and mothers. Yet, even silence could not kill every memory. Stories survive, if only in whispers. In some villages, old women claimed to know the true names of the nuns who tended their gardens. There are folk songs, often censored by the church or court, about ladies who vanished, about babies spirited away in the night, about convents haunted by the sighs of the unquiet. Sometimes on a feast day or festival, a masked figure might appear in the crowd, rumoured to be a runaway nun, staring for a moment at the palace windows before disappearing forever. On rare occasions, the wheel of fate spun the other way. A king might die, and a new ruler, less interested in old scandals, would release the mothers back to the world. Or a war might scatter the nuns and open the convent gates. Some women, freed at last, tried to reclaim their lives or their children, but most found that the world outside had forgotten them, or worse, remembered only their shame. And the children themselves? Most never saw their mothers again. They grew up with new names, new families, their true stories lost to time. Some, upon learning the truth as adults, tried to find their birth mothers, only to discover a grave marked with a saint's name and no mention of the royal secret that had defined 2 lives. For a lucky few, the story ended with a tearful reunion, but these are the exceptions, not the rule. So you drift through the stone halls of the convent, your footsteps muffled, the air cool and faintly scented with incense. You hear the murmur of prayers, the soft clatter of bowls, the distant bell that marks another hour lost to memory. You feel the presence of dozens, perhaps hundreds of silent women, each with a story the world was never meant to hear. You know now why the walls of Europe's monasteries are so thick and their windows so small. They are built to hold in not just women, secrets, generation after generation, voice after vanished voice. As you settle deeper into sleep, imagine a world where a single mistake or a single moment of love could silence you forever, not with death, but with endless years of quiet. In medieval Europe, the convent was the final lock on the secret, and the hush of its halls was more binding than any chain. Let's slip outside the convent walls, past the shuttered windows and silent prayers, into the bright, messy chaos of medieval daily life. A world alive with markets, festivals, fields and towns. You might imagine that a royal bastard's only hope is perpetual hiding, but sometimes the opposite was true. Some were hidden right in plain sight, disguised as ordinary commoners among the throngs of peasants and tradesfolk. The great irony of medieval Europe is that, for all its obsession with bloodlines, It was often the simplicity of everyday life that proved the safest camouflage. Consider the bustling scene of a village market. The air is thick with the smells of fresh bread, livestock, and sweat. Vendors call out their wares: turnips, wool, shoes, the season's rarest honey. Nobody pays any mind to the barefoot boy helping a wizened old woman stack cabbages, or the bright-eyed girl who sweeps sawdust from the tavern's earthen floor. These children might laugh, squabble, or steal a moment to splash in the stream. To the casual eye they are peasants like any other, but to a careful observer, a nurse who glances too often at her charge, a mother who flinches when soldiers pass. There are tiny tells: a curl of golden hair, an unusual accent, a locket hidden beneath a collar. Families who undertook this ruse walked a daily tightrope. The goal was both simple and impossibly complex. Blend in, never draw attention, erase all evidence of privilege or pedigree. In some cases, a trusted retainer or wet nurse would spirit a child away shortly after birth, carrying them across counties or even borders. A new life would be invented: a father lost to plague, a mother called to serve a distant cousin, an inheritance that never arrived. In the confusion of a world where war, disease, and famine could scatter families overnight, such stories were rarely questioned. The skills needed to pass as commoners were quickly learned, often ironically, by noble-born women who had spent their own girlhoods protected from want. A lady who once supervised a manor might now knead bread, mend shirts, or milk goats, all to preserve the secret of her child's birth. The child, for their part, would be schooled in silence. Never ask about the family crest hidden in a trunk. Never boast about knowing Latin or recognizing a tune from court. Never let slip the old stories whispered at bedtime. Sometimes the concealment became a lifelong habit. Children raised this way often grew up with a sharp eye for danger, a knack for lying low, a mistrust of strangers. They learned to avoid town officials, to keep away from the church scribe who might notice an unfamiliar face at Mass, to disappear when a tax collector rode through. Every festival, every fair, every visiting night was a potential risk. If you think being a teenager is awkward, try living with the fear that the way you tilt your head when you laugh might one day betray your father's crown. But for all the risks, hiding in plain sight offered real protection. Armies of spies might search distant monasteries or storm isolated castles, but few thought to look twice at the noisy scullery maid or the boy hauling water from the well. The daily grind, hard work, dirt under the fingernails, simple food, sleepless nights was its own kind of disguise, wrapping even the finest blood in a cocoon of ordinary struggle. The people who kept these secrets became experts in improvisation. Wet nurses might trade children with other families, so even a persistent agent couldn't trace a child's progress by appearance alone. Old family friends became aunt or uncle, relatives in name only, ready with cover stories if anyone asked too many questions. If someone started to pry, a well-timed illness, a sudden move, or even the adoption of a new surname could throw off suspicion. Medieval Europe was, if nothing else, a place where paper trails were easily lost and memories conveniently short. Occasionally, though, a royal bastard's disguise would begin to fray. Maybe the child grew into adulthood with a bearing or beauty that drew unwanted attention. Perhaps a visiting noble recognized a family resemblance, or a priest recalled a baptism from years before. There are stories of children who let slip a bit of Latin, or who instinctively greeted a high-born visitor with courtly manners, and suddenly the mask was threatened. In such moments, families would act with terrifying speed, sometimes fleeing overnight, sometimes placing the child in a new household, sometimes even sending them across the sea. There's an old joke in Europe: if you want a secret kept, tell it to a family of peasants, and yet, even the tightest village had its gossips. Sometimes the secret was known by all but kept in a tacit conspiracy of silence, either out of pity, respect, or fear of royal reprisal. The baker's wife might know that her little girl is no kin at all. The blacksmith might recognize the ring hidden around a boy's neck. But in a world where speaking up meant risking everything, most chose to say nothing. Let's lighten the mood. If you've ever hidden your report card in a sock drawer and managed to make it through dinner without your parents suspecting, you have a tiny taste of what these families endured. Except, of course, a mistake could mean exile, imprisonment, or worse. It wasn't just children who hid. Sometimes adults with royal blood made lives for themselves among the common folk. A disgraced noblewoman might remarry and blend into a farming community, or a bastard grown to adulthood might run a tavern, become a merchant, or join a band of mercenaries. Some even rose to local prominence. Their true identities a source of whispered speculation for generations. That family over by the river, they say their great-grandmother was a king's daughter. Most of these stories fade with time, but sometimes a document is found, or an old portrait discovered, and the past flickers back to life. Living as a commoner was no guarantee of safety, but it often offered the best hope for a peaceful life. The dangers were real: disease, hunger, the threat of war, or banditry. But they were shared dangers, the risks of ordinary existence, rather than the calculated menace of royal intrigue. In some ways, a royal bastard who survived childhood in obscurity might count themselves lucky. Better the rough comfort of a thatched roof and honest work than the knife edge of palace politics. Still, the fear never fully disappeared. Some children were haunted by dreams of discovery, or by a sense of not quite belonging. Even as adults, they might avoid crowds, shun positions of authority, or refuse to let their own children learn to read or write. The long shadow of royal blood could not always be outpaced. Occasionally, the truth would surface. Perhaps the old nurse fell ill and confessed to a priest. Maybe a letter, long forgotten, was found in a chest. Sometimes a child's resemblance to a long-dead king became the talk of the village. When this happened, the news could spread rapidly, drawing unwanted attention. Sometimes it led to disaster, a family uprooted, a child lost, but other times it opened new possibilities. A royal bastard reclaimed, given a new name, or swept up into the machinery of power for someone else's purpose. It's important to remember that, while some families lived in constant fear, others came to see their secret as a kind of badge. There are tales of proud mothers who, in the safety of their cottages, whispered bedtime stories to their children about their noble father, the king who could never acknowledge them. In these stories, the child is always special, always chosen. It's a risky comfort, but sometimes it's all that kept hope alive. And so, the medieval world moved on, crowded, chaotic, and endlessly inventive. Every street, every field, every market stall might conceal a story that could change a kingdom. The genius of hiding royal bastards in plain sight was its simplicity. The ordinary is the perfect mask for the extraordinary. As you drift off tonight, picture the village at dusk. The smell of bread baking, the laughter of children, the slow rhythm of carts returning from the fields. Somewhere in that peaceful scene, a secret sleeps. A child whose blood is both a blessing and a curse, whose true name is a whisper only the bravest dare repeat. And somewhere, on the other side of the kingdom, a king lies awake, haunted not by the enemies at his borders, but by the possibility that his greatest rival is already laughing among the peasants, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day when fate will call his name. Awaiting continue. If you follow the trail of royal bastards out of the kingdom, through foggy valleys and over mountains, you soon realize that exile is never truly the end of the story. In the brutal chess game of medieval power, illegitimate children could just as easily become pieces in someone else's plan as forgotten castaways. Now, you move among the shadowy corridors of rival courts, where noblemen and ambitious women, always alert to the faintest whiff of advantage, see royal bastards not just as threats, but as useful pawns. The moment a royal child lands in a foreign land, word begins to trickle through the grapevine. Sometimes, the court spy master receives a discreet note. A child of the House of Valois is under the protection of Lord X. Sometimes, a merchant returning from distant shores tells a story of a young page with striking eyes and manners too refined for a stable boy. Rival nobles collect these hints like precious stones, knowing that in the right hands, a royal bastard's very existence can become a weapon. Let's picture yourself in such a court, somewhere in the Holy Roman Empire or the shifting patchwork of Italy's city-states. You are a royal bastard, grown into adolescence, perhaps aware, perhaps not, of your lineage. Suddenly, you find yourself summoned by a local lord, or befriended by a sly, well-dressed stranger. He is all smiles and kindness, but the questions he asks are sharp as knives. Where were you born? Who was your mother? Would you like to serve in my household? You sense the tension, the hungry curiosity. but it's hard to see the trap until you're already inside. For the local nobility, a royal bastard is a powerful bargaining chip. If war breaks out or succession is uncertain, they can parade you before their enemies, presenting you as the true heir or a potential puppet king. Even if you have no real claim, the threat alone can force the hands of kings and queens. Sign this treaty, or I'll send your son home on a horse, or in a box. This was realpolitik at its sharpest, bloodlines and leverage, names used to stoke fear or forge alliances. Sometimes the bastard is drawn into a full-blown conspiracy. There are tales of barons and bishops plotting for years, grooming a royal bastard for rebellion. The boy or girl is taught courtly manners, trained in arms, whispered the stories of their birthright. One day banners are unfurled, and the civil war erupts under the banner of a child who, days earlier, was nothing more than a kitchen boy or a novice nun. The stories don't always end well. Most rebellions are crushed, and the pawns discarded, but sometimes, against the odds, a bastard rises to seize the throne. But not all the politics play out so dramatically. More often, royal bastards serve quietly as hostages, insurance against the ambitions of their kin. A king might send his rival's bastard to live in his court, well treated, educated, and watched every hour. Any sign of rebellion back home, and the child's life becomes forfeit. Conversely, a rival might offer the return of the child as a peace gesture, trading blood for peace or demanding lands and favours in exchange. There is a particular cruelty to this life, even for the most privileged. A royal bastard in a rival court lives in a gilded cage. Every word is measured, every friend a potential traitor. One day you might be the toast of the city, the next yesterday's news or tomorrow's corpse. In some cases, the bastard is deliberately kept in ignorance, told nothing of their heritage until the moment arrives to use them. In others, they are flattered and celebrated, only to be abandoned or executed when the tides turn. Yet, some learn to thrive in this world of uncertainty. The very skills needed to survive, adaptability, caution, wit, could be turned to advantage. Bastards who proved loyal or useful to their new masters sometimes rose high in foreign courts, winning estates, marriages, or even command of armies. The stigma of illegitimacy was real, but so too was the hunger for talent in an age where loyalty was scarce and betrayal common. Let's take a lighter moment. Imagine being picked last for a game at school, only to be suddenly named captain because someone found out you're related to the principal. Now imagine the game is war, and the consequences for losing are a lot more severe. Bastards used as pawns were not always content with their fate. Some plotted their own return, sending secret messages back home, gathering supporters, waiting for a moment of weakness in their enemies. Others played both sides, selling secrets to the highest bidder, switching loyalties as the winds of fortune shifted. In an era when legitimacy was a sword and a shield, the illegitimate learned to wield it in unexpected ways. A recurring theme in the stories of these children is loneliness. Even among the glitter of foreign courts, they are outsiders, distrusted by their hosts, resented by the local heirs, never truly at home. Many spent their lives longing for acceptance, never quite sure who to trust. Some hardened into cynics. Others yearned for a simple life far from politics and intrigue. Occasionally, the pawn became the player. There are a few famous examples: royal bastards, who after years of manipulation managed to turn the tables, seizing lands, founding new dynasties, or forging legendary reputations. Their stories were retold for generations, proof that even the most discarded lives could matter. But for most, the game was deadly. Betrayal was always close at hand, and mercy was a rare coin. A bastard who became too useful might find themselves the target of assassination, poison slipped into their wine, a midnight ambush on a lonely road. If you survived, you did so by luck, by cunning, or by sheer stubbornness. This use of bastards as political pawns was not limited to distant lands. Even within a king's own realm, rival nobles might adopt or harbour royal bastards as future bargaining chips. A powerful duke might keep a suspected bastard in his household, raising the child as kin while keeping a careful watch for any sign of royal favour or attention. The king, aware but unable to act openly, would send gifts, issue warnings, or make sudden violent examples of those who crossed the line. The church, too, played a role. Ambitious bishops sometimes backed royal bastards in hopes of currying favour with a future ruler, or leveraging their claim to gain lands or privileges. In the labyrinth of medieval politics, the game was never simple, and everyone had a stake. For the ordinary people caught up in these games, servants, villagers, lesser nobles, the arrival of a royal bastard could be both blessing and curse. Sometimes the child brought new opportunities, gifts from the grateful family, a share in future glory. More often, they brought danger, raids, suspicion, the threat of retribution from the crown. In the end, royal bastards lived at the mercy of others' ambitions. Their lives were stories of endless uncertainty, of hope and betrayal, of sudden rise and tragic fall. Some became legends, most became lessons, and always, behind every scheme and rebellion, there loomed the shadow of the crown, the reminder that for all the intrigue, only one bloodline could rule. As you settle deeper into your dreams, imagine yourself at one of these foreign courts. Do you play along, hoping for a chance to make your own destiny? Or do you long for home, dreaming of a life where your name means something more than the next move on a game board? For the royal bastards of medieval Europe, every day was a negotiation, every moment a risk, and every hope, always haunted by the knowledge that they were both the hunted and the bait. Night falls across medieval Europe, and somewhere in a smoky inn or a shadowed castle corridor, a different sort of threat stirs. If a royal bastard could not be safely hidden, bought off, or shipped away, there remained one final, brutal option: assassination. The methods were as varied as the motives, but all served a single purpose: to erase a living threat before it became an uncontrollable force. Imagine the fear that follows you as a royal bastard. No matter how far you run or how well you blend in, you feel it in every strange glance, every rider that lingers too long at the edge of the village, every knock on the door after dark. Your protectors are wary, your friends cautious, and even your own family might hesitate before standing up for you if the king's wrath is at stake. In a world where power is so fragile, sometimes the only way to secure it is through blood. Assassinations weren't just whispered about. They were woven into the very fabric of medieval political life. Poisons brewed in apothecaries found their way into wine cups or morning bread, daggers flashed in moonlit alleys, and crossbow bolts hummed from the shadows of castle walkways. Sometimes the assassin was a hardened professional, hired for gold and reputation. Other times it was a trusted servant, a cousin, or even a desperate parent forced to choose between loyalty and survival. For those being hunted, paranoia became second nature. You slept lightly, always ready to flee at the sound of hurried steps. Doors were barred, windows shuttered, and food tasted with trembling hands. Some learned to keep moving, never sleeping twice in the same bed, never trusting a friendly face. Others went to ground, disappearing into monasteries or peasant hovels, living in constant fear that the world's next visitor would be their last. There are stories, many too gruesome or tragic to tell in full, of royal bastards killed before their first birthday, or murdered on the eve of manhood, just as their claim to the throne became real. Sometimes the axe was swift, a quick blow in the dark. Other times they were drawn out, with days of terror preceding the end. In some notorious cases the methods were meant to send a message: bodies left in public, poisonings made obvious, the king's anger declared for all to see. But most of the time, subtlety was prized. The perfect assassination left no trace, no evidence that could point to the true culprit. A sudden illness, a fatal accident, a hunting mishap. These were the preferred tools of kings and their agents. Who could blame a father for the fever that carried off a child? Who could suspect the loyal nurse when a sleeping babe never woke? Let's lighten the mood for a moment. Ever tried to fake being sick to skip school? Imagine the stakes if your absence might save a kingdom or cost you your life. The performances in medieval courts were legendary, with fevers invented, injuries feigned, and deaths faked, all in the service of survival. Assassins, too, were creatures of their world. Some were lone wolves, drifting from court to court, known by whispered nicknames and recognized only by the distinctive scars or rings that marked their trade. Others worked for powerful families, passed down secrets and techniques from one generation to the next. In a few infamous cases, an entire household could be implicated. Poisoners who doubled as cooks, stable boys who doubled as spies. Money changed hands quietly, but the price for killing a royal bastard was high, not just in gold but in the risk. Assassins who failed could expect no mercy. The wrath of a betrayed king was terrible, and those who hired killers often did so only as a last resort. Sometimes the would-be murderer was caught and made an example, executed in public to prove that even shadows could not escape the crown's reach. For royal bastards, the threat of assassination shaped their entire lives. Some embraced the danger, learning to defend themselves, gathering loyal followers, and building reputations as warriors or cunning leaders. Others withdrew, trusting no one, building walls around their hearts as well as their homes. A few struck first, turning the tables on their hunters and earning names that echoed in both fear and awe across the land. Assassination was not just a tool of kings, rival nobles, ambitious courtiers, even religious authorities sometimes found it convenient to resolve the problem of an illegitimate child with violence. The tangled web of medieval politics meant that anyone who stood to gain from a bastard's death might arrange it. Sometimes years after the initial scandal had faded from memory, old debts and older grudges were settled with a blade, and sometimes vengeance masqueraded as justice. For the families of these hunted children, life became a delicate balance between hope and terror. Mothers who had risked everything to save their sons or daughters now lived in dread of a sudden summons, a letter bearing news of a fatal accident or a grave far from home. Loyal servants and friends watched their backs, always aware that the next meal might be poisoned, the next ride their last. The culture of suspicion created by these assassinations bled into every corner of medieval life. Even for those with no royal blood, the fear was contagious. Servants grew reluctant to work in noble households. Doctors and apothecaries were questioned at every turn. At court, accusations of attempted poisoning or conspiracy were common, sometimes true, sometimes invented to settle unrelated scores. But as with everything in the medieval world, assassination was a double-edged sword. Kill one threat, and another might arise in their place. The death of a royal bastard could spark fresh rumors, inspire rebellion, or provoke a rival into open warfare. In a few famous cases, the murder of an illegitimate child triggered years of bloodshed, as family and supporters sought revenge, or, as pretenders claimed to be the lost heir, returned from the dead. Occasionally, the would-be victim escaped death through sheer luck or the intervention of a loyal friend. There are tales of last-minute warnings, of secret tunnels used to smuggle children to safety, of faithful animals raising the alarm just in time. In these moments, legends were born, stories of survival that echoed through generations, reminders that fate in the end could be as unpredictable as any assassin's blade. The psychological toll of living under constant threat is impossible to overstate. Imagine growing up with the knowledge that your very existence is a crime, that every kindness might be a trap, that even sleep can be dangerous. Some children grew hard and wary. Others broke under the strain. Many lived short, frantic lives, burning bright and brief before fading into legend or obscurity. Yet, even in this darkness, there were moments of extraordinary courage. Some royal bastards, refusing to live as victims, became heroes to those who despised the crown's cruelty. They inspired songs and stories, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes true, about outwitting their hunters, winning improbable victories, or surviving against all odds. These tales comforted the powerless and enraged the powerful, serving as both warning and inspiration. The methods of assassination changed over the centuries, but the motive remained constant: remove the threat before it became unmanageable. As long as bloodlines mattered, as long as crowns rested on fragile claims, as long as kings feared rivals more than enemies, there would always be those willing to kill for the sake of order. For the royal bastards who survived, every day was a victory, a day stolen from fate, a chance to prove that they could not be erased so easily. Some used their experience to protect others, becoming mentors or guardians to the next generation of lost children. Others vanished into the mist, their stories whispered by firesides and passed down as cautionary tales. If you lie awake tonight, listening to the creaks and sighs of your own house, spare a thought for those who slept with one eye open, who trusted no shadow, and feared every stranger. Theirs was a world where safety was an illusion, and even love could be a weapon. Yet somehow, a few survived, leaving behind a legacy of resilience and defiance that still echoes today. As the candle gutters low and the last embers fade, you can almost imagine the footsteps on the stairs, the whisper behind the door, the flicker of a dagger in the night. You pull the covers closer, thankful that your own dangers are less dramatic, your secrets less deadly, and somewhere in the silent spaces of history, a royal bastard breathes another day, unbowed, unbeaten, and still dreaming of a world where blood alone does not decide who lives and who dies. Consider the psychological effect. Exile, assassination attempts, and a lifetime of hiding produce people of iron will or of smouldering rage. Some royal bastards internalize the message of their times, living small, invisible lives, but a handful, spurred by desperation, anger, or sheer ambition, chose a different path. With little to lose, they became the seeds of revolt. Sometimes the hunted become the hunters. In a world so obsessed with legitimacy and inheritance, it's inevitable that not every royal bastard remained passive or afraid. Occasionally, the very bloodlines that made these children targets became banners beneath which they rallied others, lighting the fuse for rebellion. The annals of medieval Europe, dusty, half-true, embroidered with legend, are littered with tales of royal bastards who led uprisings, stoked wars, and shook thrones to their foundations. Imagine the tension that brews for years, sometimes decades. A child growing up in exile, always hearing whispers of their parentage, always aware that they are marked for death. They watch as friends and allies are threatened or destroyed, as fortunes turn on the whims of kings and the blade of assassins. Such a child might spend their youth in shadows, but if they survive, that shadow can grow into a storm. It might start quietly, a gathering in a remote tavern, an oath sworn beneath the moon, the covert recruitment of knights, mercenaries, or disaffected nobles. For some, the rallying cry was personal revenge, a father murdered, a mother silenced, a birthright denied. For others, it was political calculation. Every kingdom had its discontented exiled lords, impoverished knights, villagers crushed by taxes, ambitious clerics hungry for change. A royal bastard, especially one with some proof of lineage, a signet ring, a baptismal record, a resemblance impossible to ignore, could be the spark that united them. Medieval Europe's history is not short of such sparks. The bastard John of Gaunt, for example, or the numerous Plantagenet cousins who sparked rebellions in England and France. In Castile, Portugal, and beyond, there are tales of half-brothers and secret sons who mustered armies or gathered fleets, sometimes plunging kingdoms into years of civil war. The mere rumour that a pretender was the secret child of a former king was often enough to send the nobility into panic or the peasantry into hope. How do these rebellions begin? Sometimes with an open challenge proclaiming the true king has returned, calling loyalists to arms. Sometimes it's more insidious. Letters circulated in secret, forged seals, rumours spread by wandering monks or itinerant bards. Peasant villages, usually slow to anger, might rise up if promised a return to old freedoms or the end of a hated tax. Castles might fall without a fight if the garrison commander is promised gold, land, or the right to call himself cousin to the next monarch. Of course, not every rebellion led by a royal bastard is so grand. Some are little more than banditry, raids on the lands of rivals, or bloody vendettas carried out in the dead of night. Yet even these acts, when cloaked in the language of rightful inheritance, become potent threats. Kings and their ministers had to act fast. The longer a bastard remained alive and unchallenged, the more dangerous they became. If you've ever watched a rumour spiral out of control, changing, growing, pulling in more believers with every telling, you have a taste of how these movements swelled. A child who once cowered in a kitchen could become, through rumour and charisma, the rallying point for thousands. The magic of royal blood, real or claimed, cast a spell over an age desperate for heroes. The most successful rebellions had stories on their side, narratives woven from suffering and hope. Bards sang of the lost prince, or the wronged daughter, of battles won against impossible odds, of kings humbled and tyrants overthrown. Whether these stories were true didn't always matter. Belief had its own momentum. Of course, the crown never rested easy. Even when a rebellion was crushed, the threat lingered. Sometimes a royal bastard escaped, vanishing into the countryside, their memory haunting the rulers for decades. Sometimes the pretender was captured and executed, publicly, as a warning. But the legend lived on. There are cases where, generations later, someone claimed to be the lost child of a bastard killed long before, resurrecting old hopes and hatreds. The logistics of rebellion were complex. Secret alliances, midnight messages, bribes paid in gold or in promises. Local priests or lords might be swayed by faith, fear or greed. Mercenary bands, notorious for their shifting loyalties, often fought for the highest bidder. In this world, loyalty was as fragile as parchment, and betrayal was an everyday risk. Let's break the tension. Imagine organizing a school club, where everyone is secretly reporting back to the principal. Some members are in it for the free snacks, and your treasurer is plotting to take your place. That's a bit what medieval rebellion was like, except the snacks were castles, and the stakes were life or death. As these rebellions grew, they sometimes blossomed into outright civil wars. Regions would split, with towns and castles choosing sides. Battles would rage for months, even years. The common folk suffered most. Crops trampled, villages burned, men pressed into service, families torn apart by suspicion. The aftermath of a failed rebellion was always grim. Executions, confiscations, collective punishments. Yet, now and then a royal bastard triumphed. Through guile, bravery, or just luck, they might seize the throne, or at least carve out a realm of their own. Some were ultimately legitimized by their new subjects, or by a desperate king, hoping to restore peace. A few left lines of descendants, who centuries later could claim with pride that their ancestor was once the kingdom's most wanted. Not all sought such glory. Some used their notoriety to broker peace, trading their claims for titles, lands, or a comfortable retirement far from the court. Others became wandering knights, mercenaries, or even outlaws, their names whispered wherever people dreamed of justice or vengeance. Not every royal bastard story ends in ashes, exile, or a nameless grave. If you look beyond the shadows, past the gallows and the haunted convent walls, you'll find the rarest and perhaps most surprising outcome of all: survival against the odds. Some royal bastards, through a blend of luck, cunning, patronage, and sheer persistence, not only escaped the fate the world prescribed, but managed to thrive. They took the very stain that marked them for death and turned it into a stepping stone for greatness. Imagine waking every day knowing you could be killed for your blood, yet refusing to let that fear rule you. These survivors were not just lucky. They were often shrewd, adaptive, and skilled at reading the ever-shifting currents of power. They moved through the world with their eyes open, always ready to pivot when fortune turned. Some survived because they found protectors, powerful nobles, or royal relatives, who for their own reasons chose to shelter or champion an illegitimate child. Maybe the bastard was a favourite, charming and bright, or perhaps their guardian needed a loyal ally with no other attachments. In some cases, kings themselves came to regret their harshness, legitimizing a child later in life to shore up a faltering succession or to win the support of key factions. History is dotted with such stories. William the Conqueror, famously known as William the Bastard, endured mockery and assassination attempts throughout his youth. It eventually forged an empire, crossing the Channel to claim the crown of England. His story was retold for centuries, an example of how even the lowest birth could not stamp out greatness if matched by will and ambition. But William was far from alone. In Spain, Portugal, France, and Italy, dozens of illegitimate sons and daughters rose to become generals, bishops, admirals, or even rulers of their own right. Some navigated courtly intrigue with grace, mastering the arts of diplomacy and patronage. Others excelled on the battlefield, where skill and courage could sometimes outweigh the technicalities of birth. A few turned to the church, where learning and piety could open doors barred elsewhere, though here too their parentage always trailed after them, a faint shadow in the candlelight. For some, the road to survival was creativity. Denied the privileges of title and land, they became poets, chroniclers, artists, or patrons themselves. The courts of Europe were thick with illegitimate sons and daughters who poured their ambition into music, literature, or invention. In the Renaissance especially, The blend of outsider perspective and royal access sometimes created geniuses whose names endure, but survival was rarely solitary. Most thrived because they built networks, alliances with other outcasts, friendships with rising courtiers, even marriages with powerful families willing to overlook or even embrace their history. The mark of bastardy, while always a liability, could become a rallying cry in the right hands. Some founded new noble lines, their descendants proudly tracing their roots to a royal scandal rather than hiding it away. Of course, the path was never easy. Even the most successful were always vulnerable to shifting politics or the whims of a new king. One generation's legitimized heir could be the next dangerous rival, especially if a new marriage or a long-awaited legitimate child threatened the succession. The laws themselves changed with alarming frequency, sometimes stripping titles and lands with a stroke of a pen, sometimes restoring them just as quickly. Let's take a breath for a light modern aside. Ever found yourself in the good graces of a teacher one year, only for the next to treat you like a total stranger? In medieval Europe, a change of monarch could upend an entire life, especially if your legitimacy was a matter of royal favor rather than law. Still, the resourcefulness of those who survived is impressive. Some changed their identities half a dozen times, living under different names in different courts, reinventing themselves with each move. Others played the long game, quietly gathering supporters, waiting for the right moment to press their claim or defend their place. Sometimes bastards survived by serving as mediators, trusted go-betweens who could bridge rival factions because they belonged fully to neither. The very outsider status gave them a flexibility denied to purebred royals locked in webs of ancient enmities and jealousies. They might act as diplomats, spies, or fixers, solving problems for those in power and carving out indispensability one small favor at a time. It's important to remember that many did not simply want power or wealth. Survival was a moral victory. To outlive the hatred, to defy the expectations of failure, was to win a kind of freedom unavailable even to some kings. A bastard who lived to old age, surrounded by loyal family and friends, might see their shame transformed into a story of endurance, a legend for grandchildren who would never know the fear their ancestor once felt. Some survived by making themselves so useful that no one could afford to lose them. Talented generals, able administrators, brilliant artists, all could command loyalty that outlasted the shadow of birth. In rare moments, a royal bastard might even become the king's confidant or the queen's secret advisor, steering the fate of nations from behind the curtain. And then there were those who turned survival into outright triumph. In times of crisis, a war, a plague, a disputed succession, the need for strong leadership sometimes outweighed old prejudices. The church or the nobility might rally behind the illegitimate if it meant stability, and a grateful people would sometimes embrace anyone who brought peace or prosperity. It was never easy, but it was possible. Even in cases where formal legitimacy was never granted, the passage of time could soften the stigma. Later generations often remembered only the accomplishments, not the circumstances of birth. The bastard ancestor became a founding figure, their origin story reshaped by the pride and imagination of their descendants. And yet, for every William the Conqueror, there were hundreds whose names have vanished. Most lived quietly, if they lived at all, working as minor officials, soldiers, or merchants, their connection to royalty little more than a rumor. For every glittering survivor, there are scores who simply endured, holding on through prudence and luck. Their legacy, however, is not just personal. By surviving, and sometimes thriving, royal bastards proved the limits of a system built on exclusion and fear. They exposed the vulnerability of rigid hierarchies and reminded the powerful that bloodlines could not guarantee control. Every thriving bastard was a living contradiction, proof that fate, however carefully managed, could never be entirely tamed. Let's end this section with an image. An aging man or woman, once hunted and despised, now presiding over a noisy dinner table in a well-appointed hall. Children laugh, servants bustle, and the walls are hung not with royal portraits, but with tokens of a hard-won life, letters, gifts, mementos from a journey of survival. The story of their origins is told only in whispers, but the story of their resilience is plain for all to see. So as you drift towards sleep, remember that even in the darkest corners of history, there were those who refused to accept the fate given to them. Their courage, cunning, and sheer stubbornness echo through time, a lullaby of survival sung by voices once silenced by fear. No tale of royal bastards in medieval Europe is complete without the shadow of the Church, an institution both sanctuary and snare, at once a shield against kings and an accomplice in their schemes. The Church, with its sprawling hierarchy and immense influence, was never a simple bystander in the drama of illegitimacy. Its complicity in the hunt for royal bastards ranged from acts of mercy to moments of betrayal, and its involvement shaped the fate of countless children and their families. From the moment of birth, the Church was entwined with the destiny of every royal bastard. Baptism, as you've seen, was both spiritual necessity and political danger. Priests officiated hurried rites in the dark, scribbling fake names in dusty ledgers, or, under pressure from a noble lord, forgetting the child altogether. Some clergy did this out of fear, others for gold, and a rare few out of a genuine belief in mercy. But for every compassionate priest, there was a bishop eager to curry favour at court, or to wield the threat of scandal for his own advancement. You might imagine a quiet country parish where the priest is paid to keep his mouth shut, but just as often the Church itself launched investigations, dispatched inquisitors, or assisted royal agents in rooting out inconvenient truths. Medieval Europe was a place where canon law and royal edict wove a tangled web. In theory, the Church's laws were clear. All souls are equal. Illegitimacy is a misfortune, not a crime, and every child should be welcomed into the faith. In practice, though, power warped doctrine to serve political ends. Consider the question of sanctuary. The Church loved to present itself as a haven for the persecuted, the abbey doors thrown open, the sanctuary bell ringing out to protect those who fled within. And in many cases, this was real. Mothers, children, and even their loyal protectors might escape the king's men by claiming sanctuary in a monastery or convent. The law was on their side, at least in theory. The clergy could offer food, shelter, and sometimes even a new identity. Some convents and monasteries became sanctuaries for more than a generation, their walls hiding secrets that even kings dared not penetrate. But the truth was always more complicated. The king, after all, could encourage the abbot with threats or gifts, and the lines between church and crown were often blurry. A bishop hoping for a new fiefdom, a priest looking for a fat parish, or an abbot with debts, might quietly cooperate with the agents of the crown. Sometimes, a child hidden for years would suddenly be surrendered, his location discovered just as a royal favour was needed, or as political winds shifted. The Church's role in legitimizing or damning royal bastards was also central. In many kingdoms, only a papal decree could fully erase the stigma of illegitimacy and allow a child to inherit or marry into high nobility. The process was labyrinthine, full of bribes, negotiations, and political favours. Some popes and cardinals made a tidy profit by granting or withholding legitimacy as suited their own interests or those of their most powerful patrons. Whole wars were fought over papal bulls conferring or denying the right to inherit, and more than one bastard owed his crown to a shrewd ambassador's dealings in Rome. Let's pause for a modern comparison. Imagine a university where your degree only counts if the chancellor likes your family. Now imagine the chancellor is the pope, and the degree is your right to rule a kingdom. Suddenly, good references are everything. But even without papal legitimacy, the Church could make or break lives. Parish priests, who heard confessions and knew every local scandal, wielded immense power. Some blackmailed nobles with secrets overheard at the altar rail. Others acted as intermediaries, helping families arrange secret baptisms or hide inconvenient children. In some towns, the priest's word was as good as law, until the king's men arrived. The Church's involvement was especially fraught during times of crisis. Plagues, wars, and famines swept across Europe, destabilizing kingdoms and opening cracks in the old order. In these moments, the Church often became the only institution still standing, its monasteries and convents doubling as hospitals, orphanages, and safe houses. The chaos sometimes gave cover for bastards to survive, as records burned, priests died, and loyalties shifted. Yet even then, the Church could turn on a dime. A new bishop, stricter or more ambitious than the last, might begin rooting out the illegitimate with a zeal matched only by the king's own inquisitors. It's important to remember that the church was not monolithic. Each abbey, monastery, or parish had its own politics, rivalries, and priorities. Some orders, the Benedictines, the Cistercians, were famous for their discipline and order, and might refuse any request for sanctuary if it risked royal displeasure. Others, especially those in remote or rebellious regions, might shelter bastards as a way to tweak the king's nose, or simply out of local loyalty and pity. Clergy, who protected royal bastards, often paid a price. Excommunication, imprisonment, or even execution were real risks, especially if their actions challenged royal authority too openly. Some became legendary martyrs, celebrated in song and story. Others were quietly erased, their names stricken from records, their deeds forgotten. The church courts themselves could be places of hope or doom. Families seeking to legitimize a child might spend years and a fortune in endless legal wrangling, only to have a new bishop overturn the previous decision. Church records, supposedly sacrosanct, were routinely tampered with, names blotted out, dates changed, parentage erased, or invented as needed. Some priests kept secret ledgers, hoping that someday the truth would be worth more than a royal bribe. For the families caught in this web, the church was at once a source of solace and a threat. Mothers and children wept for mercy in chapels, but also feared every knock at the vestry door. A priest's blessing could mean a future or a death sentence. In the labyrinth of medieval religion, faith was real, but so too was the ever-present dread that God's house could become a king's trap. Let's lighten the mood with a quick aside. Ever asked your teacher for an extension, only to have them change their mind when your principal calls? Medieval clergy were masters of this sort of double dealing, sometimes saving souls, sometimes saving their own skins. Even as the church played both sides, it also offered genuine hope. Some bastards who survived did so only because of a courageous priest or nun willing to risk everything for mercy's sake. There are stories, half legend, half true, of children spirited away under the noses of royal search parties, hidden in crypts or disguised as choir boys, surviving on the charity of the faithful. Occasionally a bishop with a conscience stood up to the king, refusing to betray the trust of a penitent, or to hand over a child marked for death. The church's contradictions were mirrored in the faith of ordinary people. Villagers might ignore the priest's sermons about royal order and instead whisper prayers for a lost child or weep for the mother forced into silence. Popular devotion sometimes elevated illegitimate children to near-mythic status, painting them as victims of injustice or, in rare cases, as blessed survivors with a special connection to God. In the end, the church's role was a mirror of medieval society itself, complex, layered, and full of human frailty. It sheltered and it betrayed, forgave and condemned, offered hope and administered fear. In the story of royal bastards, it was rarely a neutral party. Instead, it was both stage and actor, shaping fates in ways seen and unseen. As you drift now through the echoing halls of candlelit chapels and silent cloisters, imagine the whispered secrets, the hurried prayers, the bargains struck in confessionals. The walls are thick, the shadows long. But even here, the truth sometimes slips out, carried in a song, a rumour, or a child's trembling hope. The bells ring for vespers, and as the choir sings, you remember that for every act of betrayal, there was often a moment of grace. For every secret kept, a prayer offered for forgiveness. In the dance of power and faith, the fate of royal bastards was written not just in law or blood, but in the flickering candlelight of a church that, for better or worse, was always watching. The wheel of fate never stops turning. With every passing year, the question of royal blood and legitimacy ebbs and flows with the tides of power and memory. Kingdoms rise and fall, laws change, thrones are lost and won. Yet beneath all the public spectacle, the coronations, battles, marriages, and treaties, there remains a silent, persistent thread, the legacy of those once hunted, hidden, or destroyed for being royal bastards. As the medieval world moved slowly toward the modern era, the ferocious obsession with pure bloodlines and the brutal treatment of illegitimate children began, ever so gradually, to loosen its grip. New ideas, new dynasties, and new ways of thinking changed the value placed on inheritance, legitimacy, and even love itself. The story of royal bastards did not simply vanish. It evolved, taking on new shapes as Europe changed. One of the quietest but most profound changes came with the slow expansion of legal rights and social status for children born outside official marriage. In some places this was prompted by necessity. Plagues and wars had decimated populations, and the pool of legitimate heirs shrank dangerously low. Kings and nobles who had once gone to great lengths to hunt down and silence their bastards sometimes found themselves reaching out, legitimizing children long hidden, calling them back to court, or marrying them off to cement alliances. The stigma was never wholly erased, but it dulled at the edges. Even the church, so long a gatekeeper of legitimacy, was forced to adapt as reformers challenged corruption and monarchs asserted more power over religious institutions. The absolute authority of canon law waned. In Protestant realms, the rules changed almost overnight. Kings could divorce and remarry. Annulments became tools of politics rather than penance, and new branches of Christianity treated the sins of kings with a more pragmatic eye. Suddenly, the children of second or third marriages, or those born in the uncertain years between, could sometimes be quietly slipped into the line of succession. Still, the world never lost its fascination with blood and secrets. Even as the legal noose loosened, the old stories clung to the walls of castles and crept through the streets of towns and villages. A new king might still look nervously over his shoulder, haunted by rumors of a hidden half-brother raised in a distant priory, or a daughter whose uncanny resemblance to the old queen started gossip anew. Ballads were sung, plays written, and histories penned that dwelled on these stories, always mixing pity, envy, and fear. In some ways, the fate of royal bastards was a mirror for society's own anxieties about inheritance, power, family, and belonging. The question of who deserves to rule echoed far beyond the palace gates. Every hidden child, every secret marriage, every rebellion or reconciliation became a stage for questions about justice and mercy, order and chaos. Many royal bastards, despite the centuries of fear and violence, left enduring marks on the world. Some lines founded new dynasties, merging the illegitimate with the legitimate so thoroughly that no one could tell where one ended and the other began. Some became saints, generals, reformers, or patrons of the arts, using their outsider's perspective to see possibilities others missed. Some vanished into the crowd, their blood mingling quietly with that of merchants, craftsmen, and farmers, shaping the world in ways no king could predict. And of course, the fascination with secret heirs and lost bloodlines never truly faded. Even in modern times, stories of royal bastards crop up in novels, films, and family legends. The idea of a hidden prince or a princess raised in obscurity still tugs at the imagination, a last echo of a world where a single drop of royal blood could change everything. But for all the drama and tragedy, for every story of betrayal or murder, there is a counter-story of survival, resilience, and quiet resistance. Every child hidden by a loyal nurse, every mother who braved a convent silence, every friend or priest who risked everything to shelter a child. These acts were seeds planted in dark ground, sometimes growing into flowers no one could foresee. If you walk through the old castles of Europe, you might find, tucked in a shadowed corner or scratched into a stone wall, a name or a symbol, the faint memory of a child whose story was never supposed to be told. You might sit in a pew worn smooth by centuries of secret prayers, or hear the echoes of lullabies meant to comfort children born into danger. These too are part of the legacy, the quiet, persistent presence of those who refuse to be erased. The world is no longer ruled by swords and decrees, but the questions those times raised still linger. What do we owe to the children born in shadow? Who decides whose blood matters? How much of the past survives in the dreams of the present? Perhaps the greatest irony of all is that, for all their suffering, royal bastards sometimes held the future in their hands. The very attempts to erase them, exile, silence, execution, could set in motion changes that reshaped kingdoms and families alike. The world they left us is less certain, less rigid, more full of possibility. Tonight, as you settle beneath your blankets, let your mind drift through those echoing corridors, past the flickering torches and the silent convents, out into a world shaped as much by secrets as by crowns. Let the lull of ancient stories carry you, not into fear, but into wonder, at the sheer resilience of the human spirit, at the bonds of love and loyalty, at the strange ways history is shaped not only by those who rule, but by those who survive. And so the story ends, not with a bang, nor with a royal decree, but with a gentle whisper. The story of royal bastards is the story of the hidden and the hunted, of the dangerous and the beloved, of the ones who slipped through the cracks and changed the world from beneath. So let the candlelight flicker low. The ancient walls are quiet now. The footsteps of kings and queens faded into memory, the cries and laughter of lost children softened by centuries of dust. In this hush, you can almost hear a lullaby echoing through time, a song sung by a mother in hiding, a nurse rocking a baby whose name must never be spoken, a priest whispering a blessing over a child whose fate was uncertain. The world outside is far away, and for now, you are safe here, sheltered by the quiet persistence of those who refuse to let fear win. As you breathe more deeply, let your thoughts settle like leaves in a gentle autumn wind. The stories of royal bastards, with all their danger and sorrow, are also stories of endurance, of people who, in spite of everything, found ways to love, to hope, and to carry on. In their secret courage, there is a lesson that what matters most is not the blood in your veins, but the kindness you show, the loyalties you keep, and the quiet strength with which you face the world. Tomorrow, the world may seem sharper again, filled with noise and tasks and duties, but tonight, the past wraps around you like a soft cloak, inviting you to rest. Let your breath grow slow and easy. Let your heart feel steady and light. And as you drift into sleep, remember, even in the darkest histories, there is always a place for hope, for forgiveness, and for dreams.